I spotted them from across the street. There she was, standing outside the hotel, tucked close to a man I'd never seen before. At first, I couldn't believe it. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, that somehow it was all a misunderstanding. But the way she laughed, the way she looked up at him, it was unmistakable. She leaned in close, and he put his arm around her, pulling her toward him. Then he kissed her, slow and easy, like they'd done it 100 times before. My heart pounded so loud I could barely think straight. I stayed back, blending into the shadows, watching them as they walked into the hotel lobby together, hand in hand. Part of me wanted to storm in, confront them both right there. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, barely able to breathe as I followed them inside at a distance. She didn't even notice. She was too wrapped up in him, laughing, and looking at him in a way that used to be just for us. They took the elevator up, and I caught the number as the doors closed. I waited a few agonizing minutes before taking the next one, trying to keep my breathing steady as I followed them up to their floor. I walked down the hallway, barely aware of anything but the muffled sounds coming from their direction. I found the door, and I don't even know why I did it, but I leaned in, nudging it open just enough to see, and there they were. Sitting together on the edge of the bed, they seemed completely lost in each other. She was smiling, looking at him with this soft, familiar gaze, like he was the only one in the world. He said something, and she laughed, that gentle laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. I felt my chest tighten as he lifted his hand to her shoulder, his fingers brushing down her arm. She didn't pull away. She leaned in closer, her hand resting on his chest like it was the most natural thing in the world. He kissed her, and it wasn't some quick, stolen kiss. It was slow, deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. She let her hand slide up to the back of his neck, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss. I could feel my hands clench, my nails digging into my palms as I watched. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I was glued to the spot, watching my wife with another man, right in front of me. He pulled her closer, his hand moving to her back, guiding her gently as they sat together. She responded, wrapping her arms around him, holding him like she'd wanted this, like this was something real. They stayed like that, wrapped up in each other, moving with an ease and comfort that felt rehearsed, like they'd done it a dozen times before. She leaned back, letting him trail a kiss along her collarbone. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but she smiled, her hand reaching up to slide over his shoulder, drawing him even closer. I could feel the air leave my lungs, and I knew right then, everything I thought I knew about my life, about her, was shattered. I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the hallway carpet, my pulse hammering in my ears. I was watching my entire world fall apart through a sliver of an open door. They didn't know I was there. They were oblivious to the man just a few feet away, standing in stunned silence as they carried on, so wrapped up in each other that I may as well have been invisible. I watched her laugh softly as he spoke to her, his voice low and calm, like they shared some secret joke that only they would understand. The kind of intimate, carefree laughter she used to save for us. She brushed her hand through his hair, like she was memorizing every detail. She was fully present with him, her gaze never faltering. It was as if he'd unlocked a side of her I hadn't seen in ages. The pain in my chest was sharp, making it hard to breathe, as I realized she hadn't looked at me that way in what felt like forever. As he leaned in close, she tilted her head to meet his kiss, her hands finding their way to his shoulders. I couldn't ignore the way they seemed to move in sync, their body language smooth and familiar. It felt surreal, like watching a scene from someone else's life, a terrible dream I couldn't wake up from. But it was real, painfully real. I could feel the anger building in my chest, yet there was a strange numbness overtaking me, like my mind was in shock, unable to process it all. I took a shaky breath, my hands shaking as I tried to decide what to do next. I wanted to barge in, to scream, to demand an explanation. But I stood frozen, my heart breaking, as I continued to watch, my mind replaying every moment we had shared together, every memory, every promise. It felt like each one was being erased right before my eyes. Eventually, I forced myself to step back, releasing my grip on the doorframe. I needed air. I needed to get out of there before I did something I couldn't take back. I turned and walked down the hall, barely aware of anything around me as I made my way to the stairwell. Each step felt heavy, My legs like lead as I descended the stairs and finally pushed open the door to the street outside. Standing in the cool night air, I felt a sudden rush of clarity. This was it. The end of everything I thought I knew about us, about her, about our life together. I left the hotel that night feeling a mix of shock, disbelief, and a strange calm that I hadn't expected. It was like I'd been slapped awake from a dream, forced to confront the reality of what I'd just witnessed. In those moments driving back home, it felt like the person I thought I knew had been a stranger all along. I sat in the car, headlights off, staring into the darkness, letting the truth of it all sink in. The next day, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. I needed to confront her, to hear her say it out loud. I walked into the house with the quiet steadiness of someone who had been changed. She was in the kitchen, going about her morning routine like nothing had happened. The sight of her acting so normally felt like a final insult. When I told her I knew, her face went pale, and her hands fell to her sides. For a split second, I thought she'd deny it, throw back some angry defense, but she just stared at me, her eyes wide, frozen. I didn't let her stay silent for long. I laid it all out. I told her about seeing them outside the hotel, about how I had followed them in, and everything I'd witnessed. She looked down, silent, and then started with the apologies. I didn't mean to hurt you. It just happened. I was feeling disconnected. Every word she said felt like an excuse, a cover for what was ultimately her decision. I didn't want to hear it anymore. I told her that I wasn't here to understand her excuses or to find out what I could have done differently. What I'd seen was enough to show me it was over. Her tears started to fall and she reached out, but I took a step back. She seemed shocked, maybe even a little lost. But that was her problem now. I was done carrying the weight of this, of thinking maybe I hadn't been enough. I wasn't the one who had chosen to step out of our vows, and I wasn't going to bear the guilt for her betrayal. I left, knowing there was no going back. I stayed with a friend for a few days, and he listened, helped me sort through the mess in my head. He told me I deserved better, and that I'd come out of this stronger. I didn't believe him right away, but I appreciated the support. The weeks that followed were tough. Everything reminded me of her, of us. Grocery shopping, little routines around the house, even weekends felt emptier. I had to adjust to my life without her, to piece together a new normal. But little by little, I started to find a new rhythm. I got back to some of the things I loved but had let go of over the years. I spent more time with friends, took up running again, and started planning trips I'd always talked about but had put off. As time passed, the memories began to fade. I realized that our relationship had been cracked for a while, and her betrayal had simply brought those cracks to light. I started to forgive myself for not seeing it sooner, for not recognizing the signs. And I forgave her too, in my own way. Not to let her off the hook, but so I could move forward without bitterness weighing me down. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I'm more aware of my worth now, of what I bring to a relationship. I learned that I'd rather be alone than with someone who doesn't respect or value me. It's a lesson I hadn't expected to learn, but it's one I know I'll carry with me. Life, I've come to realize, is too short to settle for anything less than honesty and real commitment.